June 6, 1944, D-Day. 130,000 troops storm 5 beaches in Normandy. They fight through barbed wire and machine gun fire. They crawl under explosions. They bleed into the sand. By sunset, they control a few miles of beach. But they have a problem. Behind these soldiers, in England, sit 60-ton tanks, artillery pieces, millions of rounds of ammunition, fuel trucks, medical supplies, everything the invasion needs to survive. But there's no way to get it across the water. The nearest harbor is Cherbourg. It's 20 miles away. The Germans have fortified it. They've rigged the docks with explosives. It will take weeks or months to capture and repair. Every other port on the French coast is the same story. Fortress after fortress, booby traps after booby traps, and the math is brutal. Each soldier needs 3 tons of supplies every single day. Ammunition, food, fuel, medical equipment, replacement gear. By the end of June, 1 million American, British, and Canadian troops will be in Normandy. That's 3,000 tons of supplies, every single day, without any breaks. If supplies don't arrive fast enough, the Germans will counterattack. The beachhead will collapse. The invasion fails. The war's outcome changes. The Allies had studied this problem for 2 years. They knew ports could not be captured quickly, so they asked a radical question. What if you don't capture a port? What if you bring your own? On June 7th, something nobody had ever seen before begins crossing the English Channel. Tugboats pull structures the size of 5-story buildings. Concrete boxes weigh 6,000 tons each. Steel pontoons are longer than city blocks. Floating roadways bend and flex like snakes. This is the story of how engineers built something that had never existed, how they transported it across 100 miles of open ocean, how they assembled it in combat, under fire, while German planes attacked, and how they did it in just 72 hours. The idea didn't come from a genius in a laboratory. It came from a catastrophe. August 19, 1942, Dieppe, France. Canadian and British forces launch a raid on this heavily defended port. They want to capture it. They want to prove the Allies can hold French ground. They want intelligence on German defenses. The plan seems simple. Smash through the gates. Hold the harbor. Fight their way out with prisoners and intelligence. It fails completely. German defenders are waiting. Machine guns, artillery, minefields. The beaches become killing zones. Soldiers pile up on the sand. The water turns red. By the time the evacuation is called, 3,367 men are lost. 2,000 are taken prisoner. The raid lasts 9 hours, but the lessons last years. The British military studies what went wrong. The answer is obvious. You cannot capture a defended port fast enough. Not in days, not when soldiers are already bleeding out on the beaches. So the question changes. If you can't capture a port, what do? You build one. Winston Churchill gets this memo in May 1942. He's been thinking about temporary harbors since World War I. He writes to his military planners with characteristic impatience. Piers for use on beaches. They must float up and down with the tide. The anchor problem must be mastered. Let me have the best solution worked out. Do not argue the matter. The difficulties will argue for themselves. Translation. Figure it out. Fast. I don't want to hear excuses. This directive sets in motion the most ambitious engineering project in military history. By early 1943, British engineers gather on the coast of Scotland, a place called Garleyston. The beaches there look like Normandy, flat, sandy, pounded by Atlantic storms. The military establishes a security cordon. Local residents are told to leave. Nobody knows why. What happens next is classified. 3 teams of engineers are given the same challenge. design a floating pier system, it must float, it must be flexible, it must survive ocean waves, it must support trucks and tanks, and it must be quick to assemble. Team 1 creates something called Hippo. It uses massive steel pierheads that sit on telescoping legs, like giant stilts. The legs rest on the sea floor. The pierheads rise and fall with the tides. Connecting the pierheads to shore are sections called crocodile. These are floating bridges that bend and flex. It seems brilliant on paper. Team 2 creates Swiss roll. That's exactly what it sounds like. A flexible roadway made from waterproofed canvas. Wooden slats stiffen it. You roll it up like a carpet for transport. You unroll it on the water like a rug. It's lightweight, it's easy to move, it's completely inadequate. Tests show it can barely hold a 7-ton truck in calm water. In big waves, it falls apart. Team 3 is led by Major Alan Beckett. He's a Royal Engineer. He thinks differently about the problem. Don't fight the waves, he thinks. Work with them. His design is called Whale. It uses steel bridge sections. Each one is 80 feet long. They mount on floating pontoons underneath. The genius is in the joints. Beckett designs flexible connections, hinged joints. Each section can move independently, up and down, side to side, but the surface stays continuous. A truck can drive across without falling through. It's like a spine with flexible vertebrae. Bend it, flex it. It absorbs the stress instead of breaking. Winter comes to Garleyston. The engineers test all 3 designs in real conditions. A massive Atlantic storm hits. The Hippo pier heads are undermined. Sand scours beneath them. They become unstable, useless. The crocodile floating bridges collapse. Waves smash them to pieces. The Swiss roll is washed away entirely. It disappears into the Atlantic. Beckett's Whale roadway survives undamaged. The flexible sections move with the waves. They absorb the energy. Nothing breaks. That storm makes the decision. Whale becomes the floating roadway for the harbors. But roadways alone don't make a harbor. Ships need protection from waves. In open water, even moderate storms make unloading impossible. Cargo nets tear loose. Men drown. Landing craft get smashed against ship hulls, so engineers design breakwaters. 3 layers of protection. The outermost layer uses structures called bombardons. Imagine a giant plus sign, floating, made of steel and reinforced canvas. Each one is 200 feet long, 25 feet wide, anchored to the sea floor. When waves hit, they absorb the energy. They calm the water behind them like a shield. 93 bombardons are manufactured. They use 20,000 tons of steel. The second layer uses old ships. The Royal Navy gathers 70 obsolete vessels, merchant ships, warships, anything that floats. They strip them of everything valuable. Ballast them with concrete. Install scuttling charges. These become the corn cobs. They'll be sailed to Normandy and deliberately sunk in lines parallel to the beaches. The superstructures stay above water. They create breakwaters called gooseberries. They protect landing craft in calm anchorages. The third and most substantial layer is revolutionary. Phoenix caissons. Imagine a 5-story concrete building. But it's hollow like a ship. It floats in water. Instead of feet, it has compartments inside. Each compartment has valves. You can flood them individually. You can sink it in a controlled way. The largest Phoenix caissons measure 200 feet long, 60 feet high, 50 feet wide. Empty, each one weighs 6,000 tons. They must survive being towed 100 miles across the Atlantic. They must withstand wave action. They must settle on the sandy bottom without tipping. They must stay stable even when sand washes beneath them. The engineering challenge is staggering. Now comes the construction. Where do you build structures this size? You need enormous facilities. The British use existing dry docks, Middlesbrough, Goole, Southampton, Tilbury. They also create new ones along the Thames River. They seal them, they dewater them, they create construction beds. Here's a dark irony. They dump German bombing rubble into the construction sites, debris from destroyed buildings, bricks and concrete from the Blitz. German bombs provide the foundation for structures that will defeat Germany. 213 Phoenix caissons must be built in 8 months. The workforce explodes. 20,000 workers at peak, 10,500 laborers, 5,000 carpenters, 1,000 scaffolders, 770 steel fixers. The materials required are almost impossible to visualize. 545,000 cubic yards of reinforced concrete, 66,000 tons of steel reinforcement, 9,000 standards of timber for formwork, 440,000 square yards of plywood, 97 miles of steel wire rope. The War Office prints 130,000 drawings. Each drawing is classified. Each site is compartmentalized. The carpenter doesn't know what the concrete will become. The steel fixer doesn't know the final structure. Nobody talks. Security is absolute. One worker is allowed to know the full picture. Just one. He works in a locked room at the Automobile Association headquarters. He's a toy maker. He builds a scale model of the entire harbor system. Then they lock him away. The model disappears. Classified. Even German spies can't figure it out. In May 1944, a German propaganda broadcaster, Lord Haw Haw, taunts British radio listeners. "We know what you are doing with those caissons. You intend to sink them off the coast. We have decided to help you. We will sink them before you arrive." It's pure bluff. German intelligence has no idea what these structures are for. By early June 1944, components stockpile along the south coast of England. 146 Phoenix caissons, 93 bombardons, 70 corncob block ships, 23 pierhead units, 10 miles of whale-floating roadway sections, over 200 Beetle pontoons. Everything together weighs over 600,000 tons. This entire fleet must cross the English Channel. 132 tugboats are assigned. They're identified by a single letter, M, painted on their funnels in huge letters. The tugboat crews take enormous pride in this designation. These are the M boats. June 5, 1944. The invasion is scheduled for the next morning. The tugboat crews begin hitching to their cargo. Some Phoenix caissons have temporary engines installed. They can move under their own power. Others are under tow. Sometimes 3 or 4 tugboats work together to pull a single 6,000-ton structure. The weather is uncertain. The channel is rough. General Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, makes an agonizing decision. He delays the invasion 24 hours. The Mulberry convoys, already underway, heave to mid-channel. They stop in open water. They wait while storms roll through. The tugboat crews maintain position with massive structures in tow. If waves capsize one of these caissons, they'll never get it back. The operation could fail before it starts. June 6, 1944, 4:30 a.m. Eisenhower gives the order, go. While landing craft carry 130,000 troops toward 5 beaches, the Mulberry convoys resume their slow journey. Tugboats pull at 4.5 knots, 5 miles per hour. The crossing will take over 20 hours. German aircraft attack periodically. Anti-aircraft guns blaze from the tugboats. Some ships are hit, some crews are lost. But the convoys push forward. June 7, 1944, 12:30 p.m., D+1. The first convoy of corncob block ships arrives off Arromanches. These are the old sunk ships, the breakwaters. Royal Navy surveyors have already been there, the previous day, under German fire. They planted buoys at precise coordinates. They marked the exact spots where the ships must sink. The crews position each vessel perfectly. Then they open the seacocks. Water rushes in. The ships settle to the bottom. Their superstructures remain above water. 5 sheltered anchorages form instantly, one off each landing beach, the gooseberries. Landing craft immediately move into the calm water behind them. Soldiers can now be resupplied without getting smashed by waves. June 8, 1944. Dawn. The first Phoenix caisson approaches Arromanches. It's the size of a 5-story building. Tugboats maneuver it precisely using cables and anchors. They guide it into position. Underwater, engineers from the Royal Engineers are waiting. They're positioned in diving suits. They're standing by to secure the structure in place. Above water, other engineers watch every detail. They check alignment. They verify positioning. Everything must be exact. Then, the signal. Engineers open the flooding valves. Seawater rushes into the internal compartments. The concrete structure sinks slowly, majestically. It settles onto the sandy bottom. It takes hours. The process requires absolute precision. If one side fills faster than the other, the caisson tilts. If it tilts too much, it won't be usable. It won't provide a stable pier. The engineers watch the water level. They adjust valve pressures. They control the sinking rate, millimeter by millimeter. Finally, it's settled. 30 feet of concrete wall rises above the waterline. It's positioned exactly where it needs to be. This procedure repeats 115 times over the next week. 115 massive concrete structures, each one precisely positioned. Each one sunk in a controlled manner, each one becoming part of a man-made harbor. By June 15th, a 5-mile arc of Phoenix caissons stretches from Tracy-sur-Mer to Anelle, a massive concrete wall, a breakwater protecting the inner harbor from the Atlantic. Now the real work begins. Behind the Phoenix caisson breakwater, engineers position the Lobnitz pierheads. These are massive floating platforms. 200 feet long, 60 feet wide, they're positioned over telescoping legs. The legs reach down to the sea floor, but the legs allow the platforms to rise and fall. Normandy has 23-foot tides. That's enormous. When the tide goes out, the water drops dramatically. When it comes back in, it rises just as fast. Most piers would be useless in these conditions. The height difference is too great. But the Lobnitz pierheads rise and fall with the tide. They stay at the same height relative to the ships. A Liberty ship can pull alongside, dock, unload, leave, all with a stable connection. Now come the floating roads. Whale sections, 80 feet long each, made of steel, designed by Major Allen Beckett. They connect the pierheads to the shore. A truck driver approaches one of these roads. It's driving off a landing craft. The driver is nervous. These roads float. They flex. They move with the waves. It doesn't feel like normal pavement, but the road is designed to flex. The hinged connections allow each section to move independently. Up and down, side to side. The surface stays continuous. The truck drives across smoothly. Now comes the real test. A Sherman tank weighs 60,000 pounds, 60 tons. That's a lot of weight on a floating structure. The tank commander gives the signal. The tank rolls onto the floating road. The pontoons beneath bend. They sag a little. The tank weighs them down. Water displaced changes, but the pontoons don't collapse. They don't tip. They're designed for this. The tank rolls across the floating road toward shore. The road flexes beneath it. It bends. It moves with the ocean. But it never breaks. The tank reaches the beach safely. Behind the tank, more tanks, more trucks, more vehicles rolling across a road that floats in the Atlantic Ocean. By June 18th, both Mulberry Harbors are operational. Mulberry A serves American forces at Omaha Beach. Mulberry B, nicknamed Port Winston after Churchill, serves British and Canadian forces at Arromanches. Liberty ships begin arriving. These are 441-foot cargo vessels, the backbone of Allied logistics. They moor at the pierheads. Their cranes lower cargo onto trucks. The trucks roll across the floating roads toward shore. Tanks, artillery pieces, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, everything the invasion needs. The unloading rate is incredible, faster than many natural harbors, faster than anyone predicted was possible. June 19th, 1944. The weather begins to change. Clouds roll in from the northeast. The wind picks up. The waves grow larger. By June 20th, it's the worst storm recorded in 40 years. Waves pound the artificial harbors, 20-foot swells, 30-foot swells. The water moves in chaotic patterns. The bombardons, the outer floating breakwaters, are supposed to absorb this energy. They're massive. They're anchored to the seafloor. But these waves are extraordinary. Every single bombardon breaks loose from its moorings. Some sink. Others drift with the current. They become 200-foot battering rams. They smash into the structures behind them. The inner harbor takes brutal punishment. Phoenix caissons face a new threat. Water overtops them. Waves wash over the concrete. Seawater pours down into the interior compartments. When the tide goes out, the water inside cannot drain fast enough. Pressure builds, enormous pressure. The internal pressure bursts 5 caissons like balloons. Another is damaged by scouring. Sand washes out from beneath it. The foundation becomes unstable. The whale roadways flex and move. But the connections bend beyond tolerance. Bolts shear, welds crack. Pontoons are swamped. They fill with water. They sink. Hundreds of small landing craft are caught in the storm. They can't beach safely. They can't anchor. They become floating debris. They smash into piers and pontoons like battering rams. At Mulberry A, the American harbor at Omaha Beach, the damage is catastrophic. The American crews hadn't anchored their pontoons as carefully as the British. It's unclear why. Possibly time pressure, possibly unfamiliarity with the British anchoring system. The new kite anchor design is unusual. When the storm hits, pontoons break loose. Roadways collapse completely. Pierheads are smashed into twisted wreckage. Of 30 Phoenix caissons, 21 are destroyed. The American harbor is declared irreparable. The decision is made. Abandon Mulberry A, salvage whatever can be saved. Reinforce Mulberry B. At Arromanches, British Royal Engineers fight for survival. They work for 40 hours straight without sleeping. They repair bent connections. They secure loose pontoons. They bail water from damaged structures. They prevent complete catastrophic failure. Even on the worst day, they manage to unload 800 tons of supplies. Over 4 days of the worst storm in 40 years, Port Winston discharges 7,000 tons of cargo. The harbor is damaged but operational. Barely, but operational. The storm reveals both the limits and the triumph of design. The bombardons fail. They break loose. They cause more damage than the storm itself. But the Phoenix caissons mostly hold. The whale roadways survive because they move with the waves instead of fighting them. Flexibility saves them. The British make modifications. They pump sand into the damaged Phoenix caissons for additional stability. They reinforce Port Winston with salvaged components from Mulberry A. These modifications work. Port Winston survives. It continues operating not for the planned 90 days. It operates for 8 full months. From June 1944 through February 1945, when Port Winston is finally decommissioned, the numbers are staggering. 2.5 million troops pass through the artificial harbor. 500,000 vehicles are unloaded. 4 million tons of supplies land on Norman beaches. At peak operation, Port Winston handles 7,000 tons of cargo daily. That's more than the pre-war capacity of Dover, a natural harbor that took 7 years to build. Liberty ships dock at the pierheads. They unload, they depart, all in under 24 hours. Faster than many natural ports could manage. A Sherman tank driver approaches the floating roads. He's nervous the first time. 60 tons of armor, massive gun, all floating on a structure in the ocean. But the tank rolls across smoothly. The pontoons flex but hold firm. The road bends but doesn't break. By the time the tank reaches shore, the driver isn't worried anymore. He's just impressed. Meanwhile, back in Normandy, the beachhead expands. American forces push inland from Utah and Omaha. British and Canadian forces push from Gold, Juno, and Sword. The German counterattack never materializes. Why? Because supplies keep flowing. Ammunition arrives, fuel arrives, medical supplies arrive, food arrives, replacement tanks arrive. The Germans had calculated that without a captured port, the invasion would starve within 2 weeks. The logistics would fail, the beachhead would collapse. They were wrong. The Mulberry Harbors changed the mathematics of war. After the war, German Armaments Minister Albert Speer tours the Normandy coast. He sees the remains of Port Winston still visible at Arromanches, the Phoenix caissons, the whale roadways, the beetle pontoons. He understands exactly what happened. He says, "To construct our defenses in 2 years, we used 13 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.5 million tons of steel. A fortnight after the landings, this costly effort was brought to naught by an idea of simple genius." He's right. The Germans built the Atlantic Wall, the most extensive fortification system since the Great Wall of China. Every major harbor was turned into a fortress, defended in depth, rigged for demolition, but it didn't matter. Because the Allies didn't try to capture ports. They brought their own. The technical innovations outlive the war. 2 Phoenix caissons are sold to Sweden in 1949. They're towed to Stockholm. They remain in use at a power plant, still there in the 21st century. 4 Phoenix caissons are used in the Netherlands after the devastating North Sea flood of 1953. They plug gaps in the dikes. They save lives. Today they're preserved at the Watersnood Museum. Visitors can walk through them. They can see the structures that protected ships off Normandy, now protecting a nation from floods. The whale roadways are shipped across Europe. Many are used to repair bridges destroyed during the war. Across France, Belgium, the Netherlands, the bridges prove so durable that several remain in service for decades. Across the Noireau River, the Meuse, the Moselle. These roads, designed to carry tanks across the Atlantic, end up carrying civilian traffic for 40 years. Some whale spans are shipped all the way to Cameroon. They're installed along roads in Africa. In the 1960s, 3 spans are installed at Ford Dagenham in England. They allow newly built cars to drive directly from the assembly line onto ships. The innovations influence post-war engineering, flexible connections, distributed load-bearing, floating structures. Modern bridges incorporate these principles. Modern temporary infrastructure uses this technology. The kite anchors become standard equipment for marine construction worldwide. Today, remnants of the artificial harbors are still visible at Arromanches. Phoenix caissons sit offshore. 80 years of Atlantic storms, 80 years of salt water, 80 years of erosion. But they're still there, structurally sound, a testimony to engineering under impossible pressure. The town of Arromanches built a museum, the Musée du Débarquement. dedicated to the Mulberry Harbors. Visitors come from around the world. They see the artifacts, they examine the models, they stand on the beach and see the concrete structures offshore. Most people know D-Day as the beach assault, the dramatic images, soldiers climbing cliffs, engineers landing in chaos, heroic combat. Those stories are true. Those men were brave. But there's another story, a story that's often forgotten. The engineers who designed prefabricated harbors, the workers who built them, the tugboat crews who towed them across the Atlantic, the Royal Engineers who assembled them under fire, the officers who made the decisions to deploy them despite untested design. These people didn't fight on the beaches. Their names don't appear in most history books, but they changed the course of the war. Wars are won by logistics. Armies require ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, replacement equipment. The volume is staggering. The side that delivers supplies faster, more reliably, in greater quantities. That side has an advantage that often outweighs tactical brilliance or individual courage. The Mulberry Harbors gave the Allies that advantage at the most critical moment of World War II. Without them, the invasion might have succeeded, eventually, but at far greater cost. On a much longer timeline, the difference between victory and stalemate, between breakthrough and static warfare. On June 7, 1944, something remarkable happened. British and American engineers delivered 600,000 tons of steel and concrete across 100 miles of open ocean. They assembled it in a matter of days. They created a harbor that didn't exist, a harbor that wasn't supposed to be possible. They built floating roads. These roads were designed to carry 60-ton tanks from ships to shore. They bent with the waves. They moved with the tides. They carried vehicles worth millions of dollars and soldiers who depended on them. The roads were flexible. They were strong. They were revolutionary. They proved that with enough engineering audacity and preparation, you really can build something that had never been attempted before. You really can solve an impossible problem by thinking differently. You really can change history through engineering. The Mulberry Harbors were one of those moments, an idea of simple genius that turned the mathematics of logistics into reality. That proved that sometimes the most important victories in war are not fought with weapons. They are poured, welded, floated, and assembled by engineers whose names most people never know, but whose work changed everything. This is the story of the Mulberry Harbors, of the floating roads that carried tanks across the Atlantic, of the engineers who built them, and of the 72 hours that changed World War II.